So welcome to the third session of the Virtual Tyre Industry Conference in association with the National Tyre Distributors Association. I'm joined by Simon Hodson, Research Director at Astutus Research, a specialist in data for all aspects of the tyre industry. With the subject of what we do with tyres at the end of their lives hot on the agenda all over Western Europe, we've asked Simon to give us some insight into some European trends in tyre recycling ahead of our final session on the tyre recovery market in the UK. So without further ado, Simon, please can you enlighten us on what's going on in Europe?
So thanks, Andrew. So today I'm going to look at the management of waste tyres across Europe and touch on the different regimes that are in place. And in terms of the geographies, when I refer to Europe here, I'm looking at the EU 27 plus the UK, plus Norway and Switzerland, but our definition of Europe excludes Turkey, Russia and the CIS here. So just to put waste tyres into context, a used tyre is generated when a tyre is replaced, so be that with a new, a retread or a part-worn tyre. And additionally, used tyres are generated when vehicles are scrapped. So those used tyres are collected and sorted, and a proportion of those will be sent for reuse as part-warns or for retreading. And the remainder are end-of-life tyres, and they can be either exported, they are waste, or they can be sent for recycling and recovery. And those same principles apply irrespective of the type of tyre, although in varying proportions. So obviously retreading is far more important on the truck side and particularly on the aircraft tyre segment. And globally, over 25 million tonnes of used tyres are generated from both tyre replacement and vehicle scrappage. And so that's in a normal year, where we're talking about replacement of about 1.2 billion PCLT tyres, plus around 230 million new and retreaded truck tyres.
Sorry, Simon, can I just say that? Yeah. Slide. There's also used tyre imports on your source end there. I was wondering if you could give us some background on that, like the used tyre imports into Europe. Can you say anything about how frequently that happens?
So this is, so I suppose, you know, what you could look at, this is a looking at waste tyres both in a European context but in a global context. So actual imports of and then it applies to individual countries. So there are flows of used tyres between the countries of Europe. It's less common for used tyres to be imported into Europe. Generally, actually, the flows are the other way. But as I say, this context applies to other countries, be they within Europe or outside Europe, and outside Europe, certainly there are markets where there are significant used tyre imports. So within Europe, it's a case of more flows within the individual countries. So you might get, you know, used tyres coming into the UK from Germany, for example, but there aren't significant volumes of used tyres coming into Europe from outside Europe. So there's been a steady and continued increase in the volume of used tyres generated across Europe, and this is largely in line with the growth in the replacement market. So volumes were steady at about 3.9 million tonnes in 2019. So passenger car, light truck, that represents almost 2/3 of the total, and then truck and bus is about a further quarter. So the remainder is generated in the speciality tyre sector, so that's earth mover, agricultural, industrial, motorcycle, aircraft tyres. So used tyres generated from tyre replacement, they generally represent about 90% of the total, and the remainder from vehicle scrappage. And the biggest 5 markets, so that's Germany, France, UK, Italy, Spain, they represent about 2/3 of the total European tonnage.
Okay.
And although we see very significant disruption in 2020 as a result of COVID, in the longer term, we expect used tyre volumes will continue to grow. So this year, obviously, COVID-19 has had a very significant impact on the tyre replacement market. And also it has had an impact on vehicle scrappage, or we expect to have an impact on vehicle scrappage. So overall, European used tyre volumes will have fallen by about 500,000 tonnes in 2020, or probably slightly more than that. But going forward, we do expect a recovery starting in 2021, and by 2025, used tyre volumes should be up to about 4.1 million tonnes. And this increase in used tyre volumes comes despite changes in mobility that we still expect it to happen despite the disruption that we're seeing this year. What we are seeing is that in many of the mature markets in Europe, they're approaching what we call peak car park, and that's a result of those shifts in how mobility is delivered, in particular the shared mobility, so things like Uber. And what we're expecting to see is that over time, that long-term trend that we've seen in a continual increase in car park across Europe should start to initially plateau, and then over time, we're expecting to see that there will be a decline there. But that change in car park will be compensated by an increase in average kilometres per car. So those vehicles that are on the road are going to be used more intensively. As we know, the key determinant of tyre usage is vehicle kilometres. So how many kilometres are all in total in aggregate are the vehicles travelling, and there we're going to see a continued increase. So there are changes in mobility, but overall tyre usage and therefore the volume of used tyres is expected to continue to increase.
If we could stay on this slide a second, Simon.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to ask you about COVID-19 and statistics, because I'm sure it makes your job incredibly difficult to take into account all the variables, especially in a period of dramatic change like we're experiencing this year. Do you think that, in coming to your 2025 figure, which looks to me like the increases and sounds to me like the increases on 2019 would mainly come from the car segment? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that yes, that's where certainly it's the biggest sector in total anyway. So in terms of tonnage added, that's where we're going to see the biggest increase. Yeah,
and a lot of the trends that you're talking about as well seem to be relating to cars more than the heavier end of the vehicle market. Is that also fair?
I think that's just because that is it's the biggest segment of the market, and so it's where there is the biggest actual tonnage increase will come from, just because it is the biggest segment of the market. So I think we will see continued increases on the truck side as well, but it's the PCLT where we expect to see in tonnage terms that biggest increase. Now, if you're looking at on the speciality segments, obviously there's question marks over things like aviation, but even a very big decrease in the aviation market doesn't have as significant an impact on the total tonnage, because the actual, the volumes there, in relative terms, are a lot smaller than they are for those other segments of the market.
I see. Yes. So my other question would be related to the sudden drop of this year.
Yeah.
How do you come to the conclusion that that things are going to recover significantly to over the next 4 years? Is that making a lot of assumptions about what happens with COVID, or is it because COVID has accelerated certain trends? Just
I think,
a little bit of insight behind
yeah,
those.
sure.
Those
I
ideas.
think a lot of it is that it is based on assumptions of how the market will evolve, and it is an assumption that somehow we are going to be living with COVID, and there's a hope, at least, that we will be coping with that, whether that's vaccines or but somehow life will return to a greater level of normality than we certainly have seen in 2020. Now, clearly, if we look at the traffic volumes already for sort of October, and I'm sure into November, we're going to see a decline again, similar to those that are not as deep as those that we saw in April, May of this year, but certainly with the restrictions that we're seeing in many European countries, there is going to be a decline in vehicle kilometres over the next month or so, and that will obviously have an impact on long-term developments on the development of tyre usage. But going forward into 2021 and beyond, I think we're definitely going to see that there's been a shift, certainly from public transport to private transport, and so even though total passenger kilometres travelled will still be impacted, I'm sure, into 2021, and potentially beyond that, there is going to be that shift from public transport to private transport, and you see this in things like demand for cheaper cars. At the what I would call the bottom end of the used car market, there's been a lot of support there, because there are people who have traditionally would have taken public transport, who are trying to avoid public transport, and are therefore looking at purchasing a car, or families who are looking to buy an extra car. So I think that there is still demand for travel, be that to go to work, or go to school, or go to the shops, and it's how that mobility is being delivered, and there is that shift from there is a clear shift from public transport to private transport. And I think I've just included this slide just to give an idea about how the behaviour of end users can have an impact on used tyre volumes. So between 2011 and 2019, the total volumes of tyres used in terms of new plus retread hasn't really changed significantly, but what we have seen is a reduction in retread volumes. There has been an increase in the volumes of end-of-life tyres, and it's equivalent to about 15%, almost a 15% increase in used tyre volumes, and that's purely because there is this reduction in volume of retreads, and so essentially more tyres are going to are becoming end-of-life tyres. So there are things that happen on the customer side. It's not just that there is this continual increase in demand and there is nothing that could be done about it. That, you know, that if there was a more significant increase in retread volumes, it would have an impact on use on the volumes of end of life tyres. And that's also, I think, illustrated on the next slide as well. The retread volumes in Europe. And overlaying that with the imports of truck tyres from China, and what you can see is, you know, there was that decline in retread volumes from 2011 through to 2017, and this very significant increase in imports of truck tyres from China, and by 2017, almost 2/3 of all imports of truck tyres into Europe were from China. And then, as you know, the duties were imposed in 2018, and we saw this very significant decline in the volumes of Chinese truck tyre imports. And it's certainly a stabilisation in the retread market, but there hasn't yet been a significant increase in the proportion of tyres that are being retreaded, because those imports from China have largely been replaced by imports from other countries. So, you know, we've seen very significant increases in imports from Thailand, Korea, Turkey, Vietnam, essentially replacing that supply from China.
It's a fantastic illustration, isn't it? Of sorry to interrupt you, Simon. But it's a really great illustration of both the dramatic impact that legislation can have and the and kind of the limits of it, isn't it? Because we were talking a lot about how this is an opportunity for retreads, and there's certainly part of the intention of the EU regulations. But as we've seen, it's all it's led to is a flattening of the retread decline, and it's seen Chinese and sort of ASEAN manufacturing bases just sort of increase their footprint to make it wider, isn't it? And,
absolutely. And I mean, I think there's looking at a parallel market. If you look at the US market with passenger car tyres, PCLT tyres, so they had they first imposed restrictions on Chinese tyres, and there was a decimation in imports of passenger car tyres from China. And similar to what we're seeing here, that was essentially replaced by imports from a number of other countries. And at the moment, they're looking at imposing restrictions on that second tier of countries. So that's Thailand, Vietnam, Taiwan, and Korea. So you've got net there a second wave of restrictions. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, if in the future, if you know these those ripples in terms of the restrictions would go to other, you know, go across there to other countries. Okay, in terms of the approaches to tyre waste management, there are three broad approaches. The first is extended producer responsibility, second is a free market system, and then third is a taxation-based approach. So under extended producer responsibility, the producer is responsible for the disposal of post-consumer waste and must organise that management of end-of-life tyres. There can be a single or multiple management companies, and in some cases it is combined with individual producer responsibility. And the end-of-life tyres the end-of-life tyre management companies, they collect and manage the treatment of the waste, generally equivalent to the volume of tyres that they've put onto the market, sometimes with a lag of a year. And it's generally financed by an eco fee, which is paid by the consumer on the purchase of the tyre. Second broad approach is the free market approach, where the objective is set by legislation, but it doesn't necessarily assign responsibility, but there can be a requirement for reporting. And the third is taxation. So this is the least common system, and it's where a tax is levied on tyre producers, and it's passed on to that tax is passed on to the consumers to finance the management of end-of-life tyres. So the whole sector is governed by EU legislation that was passed in 1999, which that initially limited and then by 2006 banned tyres being sent to landfill. And it was essentially the Nordic countries that were instrumental in adopting and promoting extended producer responsibility, that concept for tyre waste in Europe. And since then, the EPR schemes have gained prominence across Europe. So with the adoption in 2017 of EPR in Ireland, there's now 21 countries across Europe that are using that approach. And then there are 4 principal countries that operate with a free market approach. That's the UK, and then Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So almost 2/3 of the used tyre volumes were generated in countries with EPR, and then almost a third in the free market system. So that's a result of the inclusion of Germany and the UK, which are obviously very big markets.
Absolutely.
And across Europe, what you've seen is that there's essentially been a transformation in the management and treatment of tyre waste. So in the early 90s, over 60% of used tyres went to landfill. But by the start of the 21st century, so by 2000, that had fallen to around 40%. But collection and treatment rates have risen very rapidly, essentially in anticipation of that introduction in 2006 of the end of landfill, and over the past decade, the collection and treatment rates have increased to over 90% across Europe. So, there has been a very successful change in how used tyres are being managed. So if we look deeper at the 7 largest Western European markets, so these countries account for 70% of used tyre volumes in Europe. So in Germany and the UK, we have a free market system. So that certainly doesn't mean that there's the free-for-all. So the collection rates are at least as good as, if not better than, many of the countries that have got EPR schemes. But in the other 5 countries, there are various extended producer responsibility schemes in place. In France, Italy, and Spain, there are multiple EPR management companies, and in the Netherlands and Belgium, there's a single company involved. And generally, particularly in France, Italy, and Spain, the leading extended producer responsibility management company is the one that is essentially controlled or owned by the largest tyre manufacturers, and in those countries which have got EPR schemes, as I mentioned earlier, that generally it's funded by an eco fee, which is paid by the consumer when they purchase the tyre, and that essentially funds the system.
Which is actually fairly similar to what happens in the UK. It's just the management of the system is different, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, the outcomes in terms of the rates of collection, there's no implication that EPR is better as such, because certainly in Germany and the UK, where you've got this free market system, there are very good collection rates.
Yeah, I know that Germany's free market system, again in quotes, has been very successful for a long time, and the UK certainly in the past decade has caught up, hasn't it? Largely.
Absolutely. And so I think, Germany has for and this doesn't just apply to tyres, it applies I suppose across all waste streams, has been one of those countries which has been is very good at managing waste and recycling, and the UK in the past perhaps less so, but certainly if we look at the tyre markets, I think the huge strides have been made, certainly in the last 20 years, and we've gone from very low and very poor collection rates to very good collection rates.
Mm.
So with the management of the waste streams, still in 2020, a large proportion, or the vast majority of tyres are essentially, used tyres are being used as fuel, be that in cement kilns or in the steel industry. And I think that one of the key things to develop the management of end-of-life tyres is finding alternative markets for used tyres. And certainly, one of the key initiatives that the industry has undertaken is to look at how a larger proportion of used tyres can be reused as recycled content for the new tyre industry. And at the moment, the European tyre industry probably is using about 0.2 million tonnes of recycled content. If the industry could get up to a target of 10%, that would represent about 500,000 tonnes of content. And I've got some objectives and some the status for a number of the key European companies here. So Conti, in 2017, 3% of the content of their tyres was recycled product, and they were aiming to get to a share of about 10% by 2025. In the case of Pirelli, it's about 4% in 2019, and Nokian, the current recycling rate was about 8% in 2019. And then if you look at Michelin, it's very clear to see over the last couple of years that they've taken a great interest in the use of end-of-life tyres with their various investments that they have made and are certainly looking to make over the next couple of years. So I think it's quite clear that the use of end-of-life tyres has risen up certainly up the political agenda, and the whole issue of waste exports has become more important. And as a result of that, certainly within the tyre manufacturers, I think that there's an increased focus to look at this issue.
Absolutely, and the Environment Bill of 2020 in the UK, which was launched properly in February, sadly has been usurped by events rather. But I'm sure the agenda will come back round to that, and there are signs that the increasing focus on not just tyre recycling, all forms of recycling, is having an effect on the market in general, because we're seeing new players come in, and in general a new focus on tyre recycling, which we will talk about in session 4. Thanks, Simon. Could you maybe just give us a bit of information now about Astutis? Just sort of leading into that, I'm wondering about how the company has seen the pandemic.
The main difficulty is that these huge disruptive events are they're certainly interesting when it comes to forecasting. So similar to, in the UK when we were looking at what the impact of Brexit would be, and in many cases it was quite a, it was a binary. It's going one way or the other, and what will the impact of that be? It is very hard to forecast those things in some cases, but certainly these are the moments when sort of forecasting is most interesting. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely, and maybe you can tell us a bit about the interactive research platform that Astutus has, and how that can maybe help with forecasting for various companies across the tire industry.
Sure, yeah. So just a very brief background into Astutus. So we are a business research analysis company focused certainly on the aftermarket, but more specifically within that, looking at the tire market. And we have worked with companies across the whole supply chain. So be that companies that are providing the commodities to the industry, tire manufacturers themselves, the retail wholesale sector, companies that are advising the sector, so be that consultants or the investment community, through to the end of life tire segment. So we work with clients across the whole of the industry to provide them with data and analysis on how the market is evolving, forecasts of how we expect the industry to develop over the next 5 to 10 years. And then our interactive platform is a way which companies can access that information, hopefully in an intuitive way, but it allows them to essentially extract data very easily and put it into their own systems. There are tools within the system to allow companies to translate the reports that we produce into their own language if English isn't their first language. But the system is designed to make life as easy as possible for companies to, as I say, to extract that data and plug it into their own systems.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Simon Hodson, for joining us today and giving us this insight into, I suppose, the global and European end-of-life tyre market.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.